92nd Street Y online media is made possible by the generous support of listeners like you. This program, part of the Unterberg Poetry Center's 75 at 75 project, features Marianne Moore reading from her work. It was recorded on October 30th, 1954, before a live audience at New York's 92nd Street Y.
Friends, I thank you for allowing me to feel that you weren't dragooned or coerced in coming here tonight. I wish wiser discourse would follow these handsome and trustful words of Mr. Brennan's. I am to read from my own work and a few of my translations of the La Fontaine fables, and something else if we have time. The Steeple-Jack. If you can't hear me, please make it known to me a little louder. And if anyone wearies, I won't be offended if you go out. Dürer would have seen a reason for living in a town like this, with 8 stranded whales to look at, with the sweet sea air coming into your house on a fine day, from water etched with waves as formal as the scales on a fish. One by one, in twos, in threes, the seagulls keep flying back and forth over the town clock, or sailing round the lighthouse without moving their wings, rising steadily with a slight quiver of the body, or flop mewing where a sea of the purple of the peacock's neck is pale to greenish azure, as Dürer changed the pine green of the Tyrol to peacock blue and guinea gray. I'm thinking of a little watercolor by Dürer that I saw in the Ashmolean Museum. A steeple-jack in red has let a rope down as a spider spins a thread. He might be part of a novel, but on the sidewalk the sign says C.J. Poole, Steeple-Jack, in black and white, and in red and white says danger. The church has 4 fluted columns, each a single piece of stone, made modester by whitewash. This would be a fit haven for waifs, children, animals, prisoners, and presidents who have repaid sin-driven senators by not thinking about them. That wasn't written for this year. It's a little too appropriate. One sees a schoolhouse, a post office, in a store, fish houses, hen houses, a 3-masted schooner on the stocks. The hero, the student, the steeple-jack, each in his way, is at home. It scarcely could be dangerous to be living in a town like this of simple people who have a steeple-jack placing danger signs by the church when he is gilding the solid-pointed star, which on a steeple stands for hope. Now, bowling. In Vancouver, there is bowling on the green, with lignum-vitae balls and ivory markers, with pins planted in wild duck formation and quickly dispersed. We are precisionists. Not, if anybody has a copy of my book in which it says we are precisions, that was a little contradiction of the fact. I let it go through edition after edition of the book and didn't see the misprint. We are precisionists, not citizens of Pompeii arrested in action, as a cross-section of one's correspondence would seem to imply, renouncing a policy of boorish indifference to everything that has been said since the days of Matilda. I shall purchase an etymological dictionary that I may understand what is written, and like the ant and the spider, returning from time to time to headquarters, shall answer the question, why do I like winter better than I like summer, and acknowledge that it does not make me sick to look playwrights and poets and novelists straight in the face. I feel just the same. And I shall write to the publisher of the magazine, which will appear the first day of the month and disappear before one has time to buy it, unless one takes proper precaution, and make an effort to please, since he who gives quickly gives twice, in nothing so much as in a letter. I might say that I do not like winter better than I like summer. I think I was quoting from someone else. Now, selections from the Jerboa. In preparing for this program, I became quite adept in omitting my own work. I found that some of it reads better than other parts of it, so I'll spare you the more difficult portions. Now, in the Jerboa, I say something about Roman artistry and Roman craftsmen, and then others could build and understood making colossi and how to use slaves and kept crocodiles and put baboons on the necks of giraffes to pick fruit and use serpent magic. They had men tie hippopotami and bring out dappled dog cats to hunt antelopes, dik-dik, and ibex, or used small eagles. They looked on as theirs, impalas and onagers, the wild ostrich herd with hard feet and bird necks rearing back in the dust like a serpent preparing to strike. And they had cranes, mongooses, storks, anoas, Nile geese, and there were gardens for these, with square pools of pink flowers, tame fish, and small frogs. Let me interrupt myself lest I forget. There's another misprint I discovered today. Dappled dog cats. There should be a D. Dappled dog cats. That's on page 17, if anybody cares. Now I omit a portion. Pharaoh's rat, I've always been fascinated with mongooses, and I had a time keeping the mongoose out of this in order to proceed with the Jerboa. Pharaoh's rat, the rust-backed mongoose, was praised for its wit, and the Jerboa, like it, a small desert rat and not famous, that lives without water, has happiness. Abroad seeking food or at home in its burrow, the Sahara field mouse has a shining silver house of sand. Oh, rest, enjoy the boundless sand, the stupendous sand spout. No water, no palm trees, no ivory bed, tiny cactus. But one would not be he who has nothing but plenty. Hunt the Jerboa, and you will be cursed. It honors the sand by assuming its color, closed upper paws seeming one with the fur in its flight from a danger. Its leaps should be set to the flageolet, pillar body erect on a three-cornered, smooth-working Chippendale claw, propped on hind legs and tail as third toe between leaps to its burrow. Now, what are years? What is our innocence? What is our guilt? All are naked, none is safe. And whence is courage? The unanswered question, the resolute doubt. Dumbly calling, deafly listening, that in misfortune even death encourages others, and in its defeat stirs the soul to be strong. He sees deep and is glad who accedes to mortality, and in his imprisonment rises upon himself as the sea in a chasm, struggling to be free and unable to be, in its surrendering finds its continuum. So he who strongly feels behaves. The very bird, grown taller as he sings, steals his form straight up. Though he is captive, his mighty singing says, satisfaction is a lowly thing. How pure a thing is joy. This is mortality. This is eternity. Now, the iconosphere. A student at Union Theological Seminary a few nights ago asked me how I set out to write a thing, and I said, talk like this? Oh no, he said, there's something, a piece of poetry. Well, I'm not, that's his term, not mine. But I never do really consciously undertake something. It seems I'm captured by it, and then I go on from one point to another. I'm very susceptible to interest in mechanical ingenuities like zippers and escalators and expansible watch bracelets and a collapsible dustpan. And then, of course, the photoelectric cell mechanism in the Pennsylvania station that opens the door before you get there. I always read Waldemar Kempfert's science column in the Times, and I happened there on a description of this steel sphere, the iconosphere. And it said that Mr. Jackson, J.O. Jackson of the Mellon Laboratories, worked out a design whereby 20 equilateral triangles could be grouped into 5 parallelograms and cut from a rectangular sheet of steel with almost no loss, scrap loss of steel. Well, that seemed most auspicious to me. So, it's this. In Buckinghamshire hedgerows, the birds nesting in green density weave little bits of string and moths and feathers and thistledown in parabolic concentric curves, and working for concavity, leave spherical feats of rare efficiency. Then there is the iconosphere, in which we have at last steel cutting at its summit of economy, since 20 triangles conjoined can wrap one ball or double-rounded shell with almost no waste, so geometrically neat, it's an icosahedron. Would the engineers making one, or Mr. J.O. Jackson, tell us how the Egyptians could have set up 78-foot solid granite vertically? We should like to know how that was done. Now, you may marvel to hear that that is rhyme. It doesn't sound that way. In Buckinghamshire hedgerows, the birds nesting in green density, Edward Cowper, E. McKnight Cowper, happened to make that remark about birds nesting in Buckinghamshire hedgerows, and it seemed to me so very exact, it's almost... I was saying there, would Mr. Jackson tell us how the Egyptians would set up those solid columns of granite at Karnak? And soon after my collected poems appeared, I had a letter from a Mrs. Heimbach saying that Dr. Stichini, S-T-I-C-C-H-I-N-I, of Princeton, has in preparation a book which might answer the question. He has discovered that the Egyptians had an abacus based on logarithmic principles like our modern slide rule, and they also had a measure which was capable of refinements greater than a hundredth, of an inch. Well, Mrs. Heimbach says that the Egyptians are said to have built the pyramids with the aid of these expedients, and Dr. Stachini, she says, which I can well believe, is a phenomenalist. He's a phenomenalist. And an authority, besides, on early Greek and Roman law. Now, perhaps his book has already appeared. I've been interested in other things since then, but now, three more of my own. Nevertheless, you've seen a strawberry that's had a struggle. Yet was, where the fragments met, a hedgehog or a starfish for the multitude of seeds. What better food than apple seeds, the fruit within the fruit, locked in like counter-curved between hazelnuts. Once where there was a prickly pear leaf clinging to barbed wire, a root shot down to grow in earth 2 feet below. Victory won't come to me unless I go to it. A grape tendril ties a knot in knots till knotted 30 times, so the bound twig that's overgone and undergone can't stir. The weak overcomes its menace, the strong overcomes itself. What is there like fortitude? What sap went through that little thread to make the cherry red? Thank you. Now, this is another scientific piece. Abbott Laboratories asked me to write something about medicine for their magazine, What's New? So I've always been interested in medicine, so I said I would. Something about the caduceus. And they very politely accepted the piece and then paid me for it. And then they said, well, the caduceus could refer to more than medicine. Didn't I mean the staff of Aesculapius? Well, this whole thing is really a collaboration with the laboratories and its research staff and some students of medicine that they consulted. In this, I mentioned the Salk, Dr. Jonas Salk's vaccine. And as you know, he and his associates typed 74 strains of poliomyelitis virus. And Dr. Salk said, when you try 30 variables and dozens of concentrations and temperatures, you're sure to hit on the right one. Well, then, he also said that a killed vaccine, although it may give only temporary immunity for a year, has if it can do that, whereas a live vaccine might give lifelong immunity, even so, ground has been gained for another attack. Then I mentioned the Sloan Kettering Institute, the recent report in which they say that we've achieved selective injury to cancer cells without injury to normal cells. This is indeed a victory, prototype, as it were, of the tuberculosis procedure. And then I mentioned Abbott's invention, their Evelon plastic sponge for surgical implants. When maybe I've said enough, but when tissue is removed, the surgeon can cut the sponge, fit sponge into a mold identical with the cavity, put the sponge in after saturating it in some kind of antiseptic solution, and the sponge attracts fluid, or I can't think of the word, and cells come in along with the fluid and adhere to the sponge, and what was inert becomes living. That was framework. That's stated in the brochure. In fact, this wording all through is somebody else's, but now, a symbol from the first of mastery, experiments such as Hippocrates made and substituted for vague speculations stayed the ravages of a plague. A going on, yes, anastasis is the word, for the virologist with variables still untried, too impassioned to desist. Suppose that research has hit on the right one and a killed vaccine is effective, say temporarily, for even a year, although a live one could give lifelong immunity. Knowledge has been gained for another attack. Selective injury to cancer cells without injury to normal ones, another gain looks like prophecy come true. Now, after lung resection, the surgeon fills space to sponge implanted, cells following fluid adhere, and what was inert becomes living that was framework. Is it not like the master physician's Sumerian rod, staff and effigy of the animal, which by shedding its skin is a sign of renewal, the symbol of medicine? Anastasis there is the Greek, of course, in our New Testament, which is translated resurrection, whereas it really means a going on, and I think a very encouraging thought. Now, one more of my own. A face. I am not treacherous, callous, jealous, superstitious, supercilious, venomous, or absolutely hideous. Studying its expression, though at no real impasse, exasperated desperation would gladly break the glass. When love of order, ardor, uncircuitous simplicity are all one needs to be, certain faces, a few, one or two, or one face, photographed by recollection, to my mind, to my sight, must remain a delight. Thank you. Well, indeed, kind about these things. Now, I am to read a few fables. Are these Aesop's fables, people say? Yes, the greater number are. Some are Hindu, and some Greek, some Latin, some Spanish, and some are about 40. La Fontaine wrote himself, some of them in collaboration with his friend, the Canon of Reims, the Monsieur de Maucroix, and the little Duke of Bourgogne, and Fenelon, his tutor, supplied some. But this interests me immensely. It seemed incredible to me that he could read and study so much as he must have to produce the many fables that we have in his 12 books. And Mr. Wadsworth, Professor Philip Wadsworth of Northwestern University, says that he had a large collection of stories, Greek and Latin, by Nevle. Nevle's Mythologica Aesopica, Nevelet. A collection of Greek and Latin stories, very brief, no description, no dialogue, but they were always accompanied by a moral. Now let me read The Fox and the Grapes. This is Aesop. My friends will be tired of this. It seems as if it's the only illustration of what I've been doing all these years that I have. But it's been suggested that I read this as typical of the method I've been trying to use. I cluster together faint, descent, and tint. It seems to me that one should try to approximate the rhythmic skeleton or structure of the French from which one is translating, although a great deal is said to the contrary, that it is dowdy to copy it exactly and so on. I can't see, no matter what is said, it seems to me that one should follow the rhythmic contour of the original if possible. A fox of Gascon, though some say Norman descent, when starved till faint, gazed up at a trellis to which grapes were tied, matured till they glowed with a purplish tint, as though there were gems inside. Now grapes were what our adventurer on strained haunches chanced to crave, but since he could not reach the vine, he said, "These grapes are sour, I'll leave for some knave. Better, I think, than an embittered wine." Thank you. Now, I'm asked, how did you come to undertake such a task, a hard task like this? I did not undertake it. I was tempted into it against my judgment by the marvelous harmonies and the symmetry of the verse. Justin O'Brien says of translating the journals of André Gide that he was shocked that he should be asked to do it, and shocked by the enormity of the task. And that is how I felt about the La Fontaine. Mr. O'Brien says one should not translate anything one does not admire. And there I am faultless, although I like some of the fables better than others. One thing I do not extort approbation for these fables of mine, particularly not from readers who are French, and I indeed owe a great deal to the liberality of certain French readers who are specialists in language. Professor Terrien, Samuel Terrien, Terrien, of Union Seminary, who is a professor of biblical history, and his specialty is Isaiah. And he said, a beautiful thing in connection with La Fontaine, he said, we need love for the truthful word, for the divinely expressed word. Now this is something La Fontaine said many times in other words of Aesop and Phaedrus and Malherbe and poetry in general. Professor Terrien said another thing I like. The French language is accentual horizontally. But do not think of that, he said. Do not let that happen. We're speaking of the accents and how they're distributed. Now, some linguists are not so liberal about their native language as he, and some Americans are not so liberal about what is not their native language. As I said to Mr. Brennan, I've been attacked as an upstart. Well, Hugh Kenner says we should look for overall merit. And he is by no means a stingy critic. I realize that over-modesty is a mistake. I've been saying that I don't know French and I don't know literature and so on. Well, I would never think of saying that I'm a specialist in language. I will say that I have a passion for languages, and the 17th century is my favorite century. And I've always been devoted to Molière, and I am much pleased that he and La Fontaine were close friends. I said here last year, I think, that La Fontaine alone represents independent poetry in his time, and he had at command a wider range of tones and harmonies than any other poet of his age. And the rhymes are interposed so naturally, it's hard to believe that the conscious technique played a part in the result. As in La Joconde, one of the stories, he has fi and di and aussi all close together. The story said, did not say what the man did or what he said. Ne ce qu'il fit, ne ce qu'il dit, and I am silent, aussi, La Fontaine said. Well, whether it's creditable to me or not, it was this hyper-virtuosity in the ear in the French that induced me to undertake translating wise, and I might be crushed by a blow. Don't feel that you should not go, since iron is accustomed to strain, no reason why you should remain. Then the other turned arguer and said, as for shocks you'd incur, or aught that you saw to fear, if you felt that you'd come too near, I'd expose myself instead, and you'd not be buffeted. The clay pot was satisfied, and so they fared forth side by side, the iron and the clay when protected, each on three legs as pots are constructed. Click-clack-click, they tried their luck, and then at each jolt conflicted if even pebbles were struck. The clay pot suffered in less than 50 paces the worst that could befall, left by the iron pot in fragments so minute you could not count them all, and with only himself to blame. Take as an equal a person who is not, and your fate may be the same as that of the earthen pot. Now, Mr. Matheson, F.O. Matheson, said, style means that the author has fused his material and his technique with the distinctive quality of his personality. This is in the Sarah Owen Jewett study. Shall I say that again? Style means that the author has fused his material and his technique with the distinctive quality of his personality. That perfectly describes La Fontaine, it seems to me, and so does a statement by Pierre Emmanuel in an article he has just written about La Fontaine for the News Digest, Page de France. He says, La Fontaine's style is a continual creating of style, a sparkling fountain. As H.D. says, the Pierian fountain, the Pierian spring, the fountain, that is La Fontaine, which is surely very graceful. And then all this is said so perleap by La Fontaine himself in The Monkey and the Leopard, denoting himself really, whether consciously or not. This is the conclusion of it. Exterior diversity can never charm as the mind can to infinity. That sparkling fount by which enchanting gems are spilt We promptly yawn by any ostentatious dunce. All lords in leopards' pelts, on which their fame is built, flaunt garb for gifts worth but a glance. Now, if anyone is wearing leopard fur, then not to feel deplored, because I never see enough of it. The fables are metrically complex, Monsieur Emmanuel says. Yes, as a flower is complex. But in that complexity, we have the paradoxical simplicity of life itself. We have in La Fontaine a use of words that everyone seems to feel is the perfection of speech, le dire, D-I-R-E. Something fresh and clear that sets him apart from everyone else. Now, it's interesting indeed that in the matter of innovation, La Fontaine is special and individual in being conventional, and also he's spectacularly unconventional when he chooses to be. In The Cat and the Mouse, stanza follows stanza, each is identical with the one before. The Duke of Burgundy had requested this, a fable to be called The Cat and the Mouse. Desiring to show a young prince her esteem, and bow here literarily, Fame asks that cat and mouse be my theme. Cat and mouse, let me see. Ought I to portray someone beautiful and charming, but so sportive and unmerciful that she tortures the person in captivity, as cats tease mice they will not free? Or should I take as my theme the whims of fate, nothing more to the point than demonstrate how smiling fortune treats folk contradictorily, as cats treat mice they will not free? Or should some king, a great one, be my simile, at whose word even fortune's wheel stands still, undeterred by all sorts of hostility, who make sport of the mightiest, if he will, as cats toss mice they will not free? But the windings of my thought have imperceptibly brought me out where each step I take will be a loss, if I let myself drone on suicidally and make my muse a mouse for the young prince to toss, like one the cat pretends to free. Those refrains are all the same, beginning as cats, as cats, as cats, except the last one, like one the cat pretends to free. And I must confess, it's folly to try to mechanically follow the pattern in every detail. Now, the farmer and the adder. Here, we have no stanzas, but an indivisible, varied pattern of long and short lines, four short to begin with, and two long, and one short and two long. Aesop, the farmer and the adder. Great discussions when I was doing these fables about the serpents in them, which were the man and the serpent. The serpent was the friend and the harmless one, but I was permitted to call this one an adder because it was venomous. Aesop tells how a countryman, as imprudent as he was benevolent, had an estate he'd gone out to scan on a winter day and observed as he went a snake on the snow in a plight that was serious, mummied from head to tail, so no longer venomous. He dared not delay, it would die if left there. So the man picked it up, took it home, gave it care, and failed to foresee the result of an action in which compassion had been complete. He stirred circulation by friction and laid the maimed form near heat, which no sooner had tempered the torpid blood than animus stirred and grew livelier. The adder hissed, raised its head as best it could, coiled and made a long lunge toward where the farmer stood. Its foster father, who had been its rescuer. The farmer said, "Ingrate, you be my murderer, you shall die." He picked up his axe. Pardon me. The farmer said, "Ingrate, you'd be my murderer, you shall die." He picked up his axe, and the dastard was dead. 2 strokes made 3 snakes of the coil, a body, a tail, and a head. The pestilent thirds writhed together to rear, but of course could no longer adhere. All should practice charity toward all. I've thrown some light on this. Ingrates, I say with emphasis, will always die in misery. I preferred, well, thank you. Well, I was paid a very great compliment, it seemed to me, when someone said recently that she had never objected to mice, was not afraid of them, but didn't like rats. And she said, "I've always disliked them, and you make me see how one could like them." Well, very gratified. Well, now, I was implored not to rush home after reading 20 minutes. It seems that I'm so considerate of the captive audience that I always end too soon. So I have any amount of ideas and material here, but I promise you, one of the technicians has lent me a watch, and you won't be here forever. I will read this mouse, Mousie, the cat and the cockerel. Guess I better find it here. It's the first time I've ever carried books away from home that weighed more than a few ounces. But I thought I'd be complete this evening. Mousie, the cat and the cockerel. An unwary mouse, so young he scarcely knew where he was, chanced to nap near a mouser's claws. This is what he told his mother of the affair. "I had climbed the hills that bound Mouse Sanctuary, like some young rat with the world to see, although not exactly where, when all of a sudden 2 beasts appeared, one the sweetest, kindliest ever reared, while the other'd run and stop and shake his head. You should have heard the horrid noise he made, with a queer red topknot veer of fur, and ragged arms with which he'd make a stir, as if going to fly and he couldn't wait, fluttering his tail tuft at a great rate. Master Mouse was describing a cockerel scratch earth, as though a bird of American birth, so his mother'd be sure to know it was unique. And then said, his arms went up, and he beat his fluff, blustered, and all he did was so rough, he scared me. I'm brave, thanks be, but he made me squeak and dart. He'd given me such a start. I hated him with all my heart. He hadn't left me any chance to speak to his sweet friend who looked so generous and was velvety like us, tortoiseshell, with long tail, a gentle countenance, an expressive glance, and oh, but his eyes shone. Supposing a rat had grown and grown, he would look like this grandee. His ears were silvery and furred like the ones on you and me, yet I could not address him with someone making a noise like that, so I ran away from it. The mouse said, "My dear, the sweet beast was a cat, a devious, hardened hypocrite." Please notice that I'm not rhyming cat and crit, hypocrite. It's it and it and hypocrite and cat and that and innate and hate. Well, I could not speak to him with someone making a noise like that, so I ran away from him. The mouse said, "My dear, the sweet beast was a cat, a devious, hardened hypocrite, with a kind of malice that is innate. We are animals he would always hate, beast who had a ferocious air would never hurt us, never touch a hair. Might, when cooked and cold, provide a meal on which we'd thrive, whereas a cat would be glad to live on mice alone. So don't, as you would stay alive, take looks for a criterion. Now, thank you. What charms us or not, I think, is the tone, the flavor. And La Fontaine surely holds the attention in his lines to Monsieur de Barillon, ambassador to the court of St. James, when he begins, "Might fairy tales have some allure for so rare an ambassador as you are? Dear connoisseur, give ear, as I murmur in air, and if I aspire to literature, I'm not too presumptuous, pray concur to bear." And then, later, later on, when he's discussed the Moore situation, he says to the Duke, "In any case, I'll sing your praise, with incense burned for you alone, to whom my thanks go on and on. As for this little fable, just for you from me, why explain? I'm hoping that it may be pleasing to you. Even envy ought to see that though you say no praise is due, none praises you sufficiently." Then to Madame de Montespan, when he's asking her to accept the dedication of the fables following Book 6, he says, "To be prized for myself, I could never have dreamed, and but asking that fables be esteemed." And in the same manner, he addresses the opening lines to the Dauphin that preface the whole book. He says, "Resonance deeper than mine must sing what it was and is to have been born a king." These verses sketch on unassuming textures the byplay of inconsequential creatures. And if I have failed to give you real delight, my reward must be that I had hoped I might. Translating is a temerary's business. And when a translator says to me, "Here is the book, as the author would have written it if he'd written it in German," I say, "Thank you. I am as indebted to you as if you had brought me a picture, brought me the man's portrait, showing what he would have looked like if his mother had married someone different from his father." Now, John Urzadel, who quotes those in an article on translation, says that Martin Luther summed it up in his epistle on interpretation in 1530. Luther said, "Translation is not for everyone. It requires a truly devout, faithful, diligent, fearful, learned, experienced, and skilled heart." And Mr. Urzadel says, notice that he does not say knowledge or intellect, but heart, and I think we agree with that. Now, I could talk a little long while about the Translators' Conference, but I shall not. It was Justin O'Brien said, "Who's to translate, or why translate, who is to translate, and how?" Well, those should only translate who love what they're doing and who know the languages which they are from which and into which they're translating. And then they all agree, and Dryden agrees, that the tone, one should try to preserve the tone and the rhythm and never dwell on a word. Hugh Kenner says the way to do is to omit what you just can't get in. Well, sounds very original. It's very much more significant in the context where that occurs. I don't wish to belittle it. Now as for this sampling of new writers, as the office called it. New is not accurate because some of these are not new and are just newly impressive to me. I would like to read Shark Eggs by Melvin La Follette. Shark Eggs. A grotesquerie stolen, not from the stars, but from antiquity. Form more dreadful than Mars men or hobgoblins from the moon. A boring corkscrew rocket, no well-paid workman fashion. In your pocket, it will lie limp, somewhat like a sponge mushroom, when ripe and deadly. You feel you owe the shark an apology for seeing his egg stark naked when out of glassed-in gloom. The rocket takes off in high, then sinks like a clumsy worm. Though you think so, it is not boredom that makes you want to go. Turning with nervous cough to the next tank, you soon feel worse. The steel blue eye of the moray eel is watching you. That's all. Then, but it's beautifully rhymed. I should have a neon sign here to illustrate that. Grotesquerie, antiquity, and mushroom and glassed-in gloom, and clumsy, and so forth. Well, it's well done. Now, Omens of Disaster by James Kirkup. James Kirkup is by no means new, but I have only come on him within the last year. His first book was The Submerged Village. The next, A Correct Compassion. And the present one, A Spring Journey. And this I found in The Listener. Omens of Disaster. There have been all the usual signs, a crack in the ceiling, rust on the bridge, the crossed lines of communication, a bee in the dust. These and all signs no longer matter. We know too well what they portend. We tried to heed, we have listened to the cry of wolf too often. We cannot fear the worst. The crack will grow into another gulf, but still we live as if each day were not our last. Then, Tom Scott, and this is written in Scots dialect, and I'll murder a few of the lines and omit the rest. I have crossed yon ill-defended border. This is called ideal love, did I say? I have crossed the ill-defended border that separates the real from the ideal. Yon Chinese lad, Aladdin was, they called him, struck no more magic power from yon old lamp nor I have doomed, when beauty wrapped her spell over my wild imagination, till it became more real than the real world. The after comes a sickness till me yet, a dream that still can read my soul, of both imagination and reality. I'll have no more of it. The guilty dream shall die, and imagination wed reality. He's very accomplished indeed, and Peter Russell publishes his books. Then, Sidney Goodsir Smith, you may all know, he also writes in that bewitched lingo, Vox Humana, this is called, and I cannot read it. But the closing words are, this is, I take it, about the crucifixion, or personal crucifixion. I took the dole of man to be my name. I live, I dree, I die, I live again. Thy debts are weighty, thrall. I fain would have remedy. Now, the Tom Scott's ballad, Snows of Yesteryear. rides Flora new, yon Roman belle. Whar's Eloise, yon Weiss abbess, for whom Pete Abelard manless fell, yet loving I at Saint Denis, wrought Uty's days in cloistered cell. And say, where yon queen is as well, Queen Blanche, as pure as the fleur-de-lis, whose voice no sirens could excel, Bigford Beatrice, and her that ruled the main herself, Joanne the Good, the last they tell, the English brunt for her in Jean, the English brunt for her in Jine. Where are they, sovereign? I appeal. Ah, where are the snaws long signed? Hope nobody Scottish and censorious has been here, has heard these. Now, Leonie Adams is not just beginning, and her book, her present book, is all the better for that, perhaps, I think. It is called Poems, a Selection. And like the commercials that ring in our ears, I would say, Leonie Adams' Poems, a Selection, is published by Fontaine. Well, there is an unsubservient authority about the book that I admire very much. The descriptions are startling. They need their context, but even taken out of it, they are so keen and unstereotyped that they stay in the mind. As where she says, the grape is swung beneath the eyelids of the vine, and then the grapes drop glimmering to the shears. And then the last one in the book and the last lines of it. And thus, when death has taken all the rest, life's self is heard within earth's icy breast. I'm very anxious to see Rolfe Humphrey's book, and Louise Bogan's has some remarkable things in it. And then I understand that Wallace Stevens is to read from his next week. And the classic anthology is a real book, Confucius, defined by Confucius. The classic anthology defined by Confucius and published by the Harvard Press. And among the lesser complaints, now I close with this. Man ought to sit quiet as bird on bough, cagey as edging a precipice, lightfoot as treading thin ice. And then another, Cheng, the young king. I think it is amazing, or at least to me, how much is said in these 3 lines. Awe is upon me. Thought from heaven pours down. No light fate his, who comes young to the crown. That's Cheng, the young king. There's more of it, but that is sufficient. And as the radio people say, I thank you.
Thanks for listening. 92nd Street Y Unterberg Poetry Center webcasts and access to our archive are made possible by the generous support of listeners like you. For more information on 92nd Street Y and all our programs, please visit us on the web at 92y.org. This program is copyright 1954 by 92nd Street Y.